Let me have a look in here, but I don't think I've got it. I did look when I was at the archives, but I couldn't find, there weren't any.
I'll put it in, Lois.
Okay, I just want to go and find a quiet little corner.
You're signed in.
I'll
You're going to introduce this meeting?
Yes.
Now, do you know when the next meeting is?
I mean, I think did Lois send you the?
Yeah, no date.
I'll see if I can find it.
Oh, it might be.
When it cycles through, you could just ask him to cycle through. Wait, no, sorry. Oh yeah, good.
Really?
Oh, no, there are two specs here. Excellent. My jokes will not be mine.
A lot of people.
How you going, Jeff?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Enjoyed your talk on Sunday.
Did you?
Yeah.
Depends on how many bruises I get. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our regular meeting of Friends of Lutheran Archives. And our May meeting, like lots of other activities in May, is in History Month. So it's pleasing to see so many people here, and I presume there is quite a number who came here as a result of seeing the meeting advertised in the History Month magazine. So how many of you came as a result of that? I can't even count that far. Well, a special welcome to you all. There's a huge number of people here. So we hope that you enjoy the presentation tonight, and there it is. We have a couple of announcements first. So last year we announced an annual research fellowship and up to the value of $1,000, and that's open again. And so if anybody wants to look at the criteria for it and the application form, please see us. And I also announced that tonight's presentation is also live streamed, and so we welcome people on live stream, or if you see it later on YouTube. But if any of those people want to or know somebody that would benefit from a research fellowship grant, please get in contact with us and we can give you the information to see whether it fits the criteria that we have. So there's a lot of History Month activities going on, and some of them are really well patronised, as you would have probably noticed. We've got one visitor here tonight who's been very busy on that topic, Sam Daring. And Sam is here tonight. He's been to our meetings before and he's been a speaker here. And
Batteries are going. Talk amongst yourselves.
cough, cough.
Thank you. I just mentioned Sam Daring, and this year he's doing a guided tour of the 3 Lutheran churches at Neil's Flat. You know where Neil's Flat is? Somewhere between Truro and Yadunda. And that small village had 3 churches in its time. There's still one existing. And so he's doing a guided walking tour in that one area. It can accommodate 50 people. He had one talk lately, he had 50. Now he's doing another one. He's got 60 people and possibly 2 more yet after that if there's enough people. So just a small regional area like that to have so many people showing an interest is really showing a lot for what can happen History Month in a remote area. We've got more visitors here, welcome. If I can sit there, it'd be handy. Also to mention our next meeting, and it was up here, I think it's the 27th of June, is that right? 27th of June. And Dr. David Moore from Alice Springs is going to be our speaker on the work of Pastor Philip Shearer. And David spoke here last April, about Adolf Heinrich and the work that he was doing in Central Australia. And when he was at our home, looking at some of the research stuff I had there, he said there would be at least 2 other people that would be worthy of a topic for his presentation for FoLA. And one of those is Pastor Philip Shearer. And so he's coming down in June, and he's giving a presentation on some of the work that Pastor Shearer did in Central Australia. He was a Lutheran pastor, Lutheran missionary, and he spent quite a lot of time in his life in Hermannsburg. He did a lot of writing, a lot of research work, a lot of translation work, and so David Moore is going to reflect on 2 aspects of the work that Pastor Shearer did in that area. He died in 1999, I think, yes. I went to his funeral at Hübbe, and his father was also a Lutheran pastor. He grew up in Canberra, and his father, if memory serves me right, got to the age of 97 years. Pastor Shearer didn't get quite that far. He later was a pastor at Blythe, I think, and then also he was archivist of the Lutheran Archives for a while. And during that time, he established, extra contacts. When he retired in the Barossa, he was also a member of the Barossa Archives Committee and sang in the leader tafel and was involved with a lot of other things there too. He also wrote some articles for the Lutheran Yearbook, 2 of them in relation to Central Australia. And and they were quite long articles as well, a lot of photos, and he sort of really excelled in documenting things that happened, and so I'd certainly encourage anybody who's interested to come along next month. And David is going to outline 2 aspects of Pastor Shearer's work, the recording of Central Australian history and his translation work, and he'll also focus upon his 1947 translation of Missionary Karl Strelow's Adelaide German dictionary, which is an invaluable source for the development of the Western Adelaide dictionary database. So he was really important in many aspects of work in Central Australia. So look, we encourage you to come along to that meeting. I thought maybe we could get Sam Daring to speak to us at a FoLA meeting about his work there, and he'd be happy to do that. The only problem is, in September he's heading off to Germany to study for 2 years. So we're going to have to wait for a while. Good luck to you, Sam. It's not the first time he studied in Germany. So now we get on to tonight's topic, and Ben Hollister is no stranger to FoLA members, and we've asked one of his workmates, Bethany Peach, to introduce him.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. As Jeff mentioned, I was asked by the FoLA committee to introduce Ben because I'm one of his colleagues at Lutheran Archives. I'm the reference archivist there, and Ben and I used to share the same job, and now he's moved on to bigger and better things while I man the front desk for the whole week. So he wasn't happy with Lois spruiking him at previous meetings as the expert on Germans in the City of Adelaide. So I asked him what he wanted me to say, and it consisted of, "This is Ben, please clap when he stops talking." But with some prodding, he did send me a bio. Actually, he sent me a document with several different bios to pick from, which is a solid demonstration of how many different fields Ben has worked in, which include health, emergency management, education, finance, information technology and marketing, education, sport, history, and cultural communities. But for tonight, I have chosen History Focus 250 words. So, Ben Hollister has been a professional historian since 2007 and a historical researcher since 1997. He owns and operates History Helper, a historical research business, and is contracted at Lutheran Archives as a project archivist and project digitisation technician. His research work focuses on German-Australian migration, general family history services, and specialist family history services for adoption and stolen generation cases. He also offers education, mentoring, and publishing services to other researchers, and historical tours, presentations, and digital literacy mentoring to the general public. He has provided professional services to the IATSIS Family History Unit and to the US production of Who Do You Think You Are? He's also the co-convener of the Germanic and Continental European Special Interest Group of Genealogy SA from 2014 to 2019. He founded and served as executive officer of the GAGHA, the German Australian Genealogy and History Alliance, from 2016 to 2019. He was a director of the APG, Association of Professional Genealogists, from 2016 to 2020. And he currently sits on the board of the AGES, Association of Genealogy Educators and Schools, and he currently runs the Heimat Adelaide Mapping and Biography Project. He is a distinguished certified professional with the Australian Library and Information Association and a member of the ASA, Australian Society of Archivists. So however much he doesn't like being called the expert, Ben has certainly collected a lot of knowledge and experience in this area, as well as a lot of acronyms. I've personally learned a lot from Ben during my time at Lutheran Archives, and I'm sure we're all in for a very informative and entertaining presentation. So I'll pass over to him. Thank you.
Am I live? Oh, I am. The Evening Journal, Adelaide, South Australia. I'm on the big one. Still not working. About now? No. I can talk really loudly while we're going through this. So the Evening Journal, Adelaide, South Australia, 13th of December 1886. Another of the old colonial first settlers has passed away in the person of Mr. D.H. Schreifvogel, who died on Monday morning, December the 13th, in his 70th year. Daniel Henry Schreivogel was a German who came out from London in the first ship that arrived in the colony, the Duke of York. In 1836, as a clerk in the employ of the South Australia Company. In 1838, the deceased was accidentally thrown from a horse and received injuries which, up to the time of his death, seriously affected his mental faculties. Owing to the unfortunate accident, the deceased was subject to many strange delusions and frequently wrote to the government and private individuals on various topics. For several years following the accident, however, he was therefore engaged at the Bank of South Australia. One of his duties consisted in serving notices of dishonoured bills, and so thoroughly did his name become associated with that task that recipients of the unwelcome documents got in the habit of saying that they had been Schreivogeled. Power. So the theme of History Month, well, South Australia's History Festival, I'm very old, so I call it History Month. I've only just stopped calling it History Week, so bear with me. South Australia's History Festival, this year, the theme is power, and really that's what I want to talk about tonight. Mostly because, well, being a German and actually causing all of the English, is what we call people that aren't German, we call them the English, doesn't matter where they're from, they're just the English. Getting the English to actually use a German name, and it's not an easy German name, a German name, and it's recorded in court documents and spelt correctly, that's power. Creating language is power. The Irish have a saying which is Tirgon Changa, Tirgon Anam, which means that a land without a language is a land without a soul. And it's actually very, very important. The language forms it. So this is power. This is power. And this same capturing of linguistic power continues today. For example, in regards to this presentation, I was Zvekt. Being Zvekt is when you get cornered by various members of the very large Zvek family, usually those with higher doctoral degrees, that say things like, can you please give us a presentation? We really, really want you to do it. And you feel like you can't back down. So that's why I'm here. I'm here because certain members, who shall remain sitting in those two chairs, got me to come along. And I'm really, really happy to be here. The other part of linguistics, which I think is really important just to note, is the work that Teichelmann, Schulman, Closey, Meyer did with the Ghana people and the fact that they have been able to reclaim language. And again, there's that power. We've actually helped to give the Ghana people power by reclaiming their language. But that's not what I'm really going to talk about, because I'm going to give you a snapshot of the influence that Germans had. These are Germans living in the city of Adelaide, not Hindmarsh, not Stepney, not Klemzig, because that's country, all right? 19th century, that's far country. Talking about the city of Adelaide, within the parklands. The influence that those people that lived and worked in the city of Adelaide had on the city itself and on South Australia. Right, I don't have to read anymore. I'm just going to wander aimlessly, mostly because I'm not sure that this is going to quite reach. If I accidentally laser somebody, I apologise now. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the way that the city looks and how many buildings that you've looked at and walked past and seen. And has anybody been on one of my tours? Okay, all of you have seen this. You can just sleep through the next bit. Okay, so that's fine. Try not to snore, but that'll be fine. For those of you that haven't, this will actually go through just some of the things that we do. I'll just wander down the back a little bit. No, I won't. I'm going to signal to you, and then you're going to do the little clicky things. All right. Clicky thing. Nope. Oh, there we go. I'm going to talk about 5 architects who were lucky enough to be working in the city at a particular time when there was a massive explosion of architecture. And so these architects actually ended up having a massive influence on the look of Adelaide. First one is Frederick William Danker. Now, his father came from Schleswig. So therefore, of course, he claimed that he was Danish. But, you know, I'm going, if your name's Friedrich Wilhelm Danker, then you probably, and you speak German and you attend a German Lutheran church, I'm calling you a German. His mother was English, i.e. not German. And he created a bunch of buildings. So you might actually recognise this building. This is from the old East End Market, down the east end of Rundle Street. And this is the Conrad's butcher shop. Conrad, of course, also being a German. And it was the first purpose-built butcher shop in Adelaide. And so the reason it's actually got quite large bottom windows, and if you actually go and look at it, it has marble on the sills, and it's where they actually used to lay the meat. And so you'd come along on the outside and you could actually look at this. This is really, really well intact. And that's actually called Conrad's Lane now. And it's blue plated because it talks about that. Be aware that when it comes to German, many of the blue plates are actually quite incorrect, because in the 1980s we didn't have the internet, so they took a punt with a lot of the things that they wrote on there. I take a punt as well. Whenever I run a tour, I always say, if you ever listen to a historian and they tell you a fact, when you go home, go and look it up to make sure, because sometimes we can be a little liberal with the truth. Anyway, so that's it. Next. Another massive building that he was involved with was the men's factory on Wakefield Street. So the men's factory, well, the men's building originally was this part, and he was involved in actually extending it. So that, was that me or you? Me. Hey, there we go. Hey, he was involved in extending it all the way down. The men's factory almost covers the entire acre now. It's 3 stories. It goes down into a basement level. Very, very important. This is a fundamentally important building, not only because it's made with, I'm probably going to guess, Tema bluestone from the Tema quarry. That's the word. I was going to say mine, but I knew it wasn't a mine. The Tema quarry up in Mitcham. But it's one of the longest running businesses to sit in one spot in the city. Opened in 1850 as a grocery store, closed in 1975. That's when they stopped actually making things there. This is where, importantly, this is where Crown Mints were first stamped in 1892. This is where, in 1922, yo-yo biscuits were developed. This is where, in 1948, they made fruit chocks. All right? That is an amazing bit of culinary history. All right, he also did the Metropolitan Hotel because Germans love pubs, and so lots and lots of the pubs in the city have got German links to them. This one is the Metropolitan Hotel in Grote Street, a beautiful bit of 1880s architecture. Any pub that you see that is 2 stories tall in the city is going to have been built between the 1870s and the 1890s. There was a massive boom at that point, and they decided to move toward having 2-story pubs and going from being inns and taverns to being hotels. Now, this was a good thing because hotels apparently were a bit posher, but it was a bad thing as well because there was actually a law at that point of time that said if you run a hotel and you have accommodation and the police find a dead body, you're required to store the dead body in your hotel until such a point of time as the coroner's inquest is held, which will also be at your pub in the bar. Not so bad in winter, nights like tonight, dead bodies, no problem at all. Middle of summer, not so fun. Also not good for the pubs that are close to the River Torrens when they pull the body out and it's been in there for a week or so. Does tend to lower your clientele coming in a little bit, so the publicans did spend a good 50 years trying to get that law overturned. Danker also built St Paul's at Harndorf. He was the architect responsible for St Paul's at Harndorf. And the Our Boys Institute on... which one? It's on Wakefield? Yep, on Wakefield Street. This is a hotel now, but it's just, you start to see and start to look at things like the styling that he uses. So there's sort of this Gothic parts, but then all of this beautiful Gothic-esque styling around there. And the Germans did like their Gothic architecture. This is a bit of a mishmash because that's Roman at the bottom. And then it's Gothic at the top. It's because the Gothic stuff's built on top of Rome. If you go archaeologically, Rome came before the Gothic period. See, okay, moving on. That's a bad joke, I'm sorry. No, I think I've lost connection. Oh, no, there we go. So the second person I want to look at is Bayer, Ernst Henry Bayer. Now, again, born in Adelaide, again, had an English mother. And I'm not claiming that having the English mother actually makes them better as architects, but he's the son of Friedrich Karl Bayer, who was the doctor within Adelaide, one of the most loved doctors within Adelaide. Ernst Henry also loved building pubs. Loved building pubs in North Adelaide. Built the Cathedral Hotel in the 1880s. Click it. Built the what is now looking slightly derelict. This is the Commercial Hotel or North Adelaide Hotel or Daniel O'Connell's just in the next street. And it's got quite important architectural features. Apparently these chimneys are architecturally very important because they're very tall and they've got these little bits on them up the top. I go, that's lovely. They're very skinny as well. But if you actually get up close, and I didn't want to get too close because there's all things falling off it and I value my life. Sorry, I do value my life more than, doing this. I'm not going to die for your presentation. But again, it's got these great archways and stuff. It's actually in reasonably good condition outside. The interiors of all of these pubs have been destroyed. Again, this was built by him, and it was actually owned and operated by Germans for about 30 years in the 19th century, the Ibben family. And just around the corner, the Wellington Hotel. And again, this is a really interesting one because he uses wood, whereas most of the other ones are using iron. So it's actually one of the few examples of using wood. And these have become part of our streetscape. The grandstand at Victoria Park was another one of his. This end. Not these ones. These are rubbishy later ones. This flash one at the end. He did the Norwood Town Hall. He did the Piers Hotel. And I thought, this is a lovely... It's such a wedding cake, but massive colonnades. Just these huge colonnades. And the only thing I can remember is the time that Cold Chisel was playing down there, and they kicked some people out of the pub who then promptly decided to drive back in their ute through one of the windows. But yeah, just absolutely beautiful. And when you look at it like this, there's nothing else there. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to build a pub at Semaphore. There's no houses, but we'll build a pub. If we build it, they will come. And so it's just this great piece of architecture. Now, Bayer just had really actually got into the seaside a bit, so he did the mansions at Grange was another one of his. And also Escort House down at Grange was another one of his. And these are quite stunning designs, all the way up to this light area. So it actually had light that came in through the top and allowed you to get light all the way through. Used as various children's hospital, disability homes, etc. over the years. It was going to get knocked down a few years ago, but I think it has been turned over. All right. Number 3, George Klevitz Soward. He didn't have an English mother. He had an English father. Had a German mother, but always was called George Klevitz Soward. Klevitz being the German name. His mother and his aunt were actually 2 teachers that came out in the 1850s as young women and started a school for young women at the end of Rundle Street. Way. Now, too far. He did this. This is next to the Richmond Hotel. This is actually Heinrich Ludwig Voss's purpose-built glass factory. To give you an idea about how things were running in the city, we had heavy industry right the way into Rundle Street. I'm talking serious heavy industry. This is where they were actually making plate glass. So it's a big, heavy industrial factory next to the pub. There's also a pub on the other side. That's not a German thing just to decide that you're going to do it in the pub, but, you know, it's just luck. And as you'll find as we go through a lot of them, they do like to use their buildings to also advertise themselves. This is a massive piece of plate glass to stick in the middle and say, look what we can do. And look, we've got pretty round things as well. Come to us for your glass needs. Soward also did Epplesworth House on Perry Street. That's one of his. Gothic. He loves Gothic. Absolutely loved Gothic. Although he was... He did get called into doing a neoclassical thing here. This is Tavistock Buildings in Rundle Street. Little bit of architectural. This is academic architectural knowledge. In academic classical architecture, it must be symmetrical. This is not symmetrical. You've got the central part, two bits coming either side, and then you've got another part there, and there's a big missing bit here, because that used to be a pub. That used to be the Tavistock Hotel. If you've ever noticed that Frome Road seems to always be under construction, and it's under construction again, it's because it's not a single road. It was Tavistock Lane, buildings, Ackland Street, and then they were going to take it all the way through to South Terrace, but they ran out of money, which isn't something that we hear from the Adelaide City Council often. Anyway, this is amazing. This is a massive, massive piece of architecture to come out. And it was built with the hotel on the corner, and then the rest of it was to be shops with living quarters for the owners above it. He did the Gawler Chambers on North Terrace, which is still there and still extant. A bit of Romanesque stuff there again. Got a few colonnades running up the top there. He was the one that joined all of the houses together to make the Queen Adelaide Club nearby. So you've suddenly got this whole piece along North Terrace, which is George Clevitt Soward. He did the Wilkinson building on Curry Street, was one of his. The only example of industrial Romanesque architecture in the state. And it's there, and it was a German. This really is Romanesque. I mean, like, look at this up the top there, and these big rocky bits at the bottom. They do this in the eastern states a lot, and it's really big in Midwest America, along the Mississippi, etc., but we don't have a lot of examples of it here. So these Germans were actually bringing in a massive amounts. The University of Adelaide Pavilion in the Parklands, the City of Adelaide Town Hall, he did this end. That got added on afterwards. And of course, Beehive Corner, which is neo-Gothic to a T. So this was really his piece de resistance. It's what he's most well known for is Beehive Corner. Again, and what's being used in the current SA tourism adverts on TV as being I went to the movies on Sunday. I very rarely get to see ads. I get all of those, surveys coming out saying, have you seen this ad? And I go, nope. Did you see this on television? No, I don't watch television. So it's like, but I went to the movies and they've got the new SA tourism ad, and the bee comes off the beehive and flies down. This is so indelibly South Australian, and everybody knows where it is, and that's German. Alrighty, next one. Krischow. This is Friedrich Charles. Now, he doesn't get his name put to a lot of stuff, but he was actually working as the chief draftsperson during the time of Owen Smith, being the not Commissioner of Works, but the Director of Works Department. And because Owen Smith, he quite happily said, I'm a great administrator, I am not a great architect, Krischow was actually the person that probably has done the majority of design work for government buildings from the 1870s through to the 1900s. He was one responsible for them. He then, when he retired at the age of 60 in 1921, he then went into private practice. But in his retirement article, it said there basically courthouses, police stations, schools, all built during that period, post post the compulsory schooling process, so when all these schools have been, they were probably drafted and designed by Critchow. Now, one that he definitely did is the Brookman building from the University of South Australia. But then this is the Heuzenroeder chambers up in Tanunda, just next to the museum, next door. That's also one of his, and he did one of the Heuzenroeder homes up there as well. He worked throughout the state. Do you get the feeling that we've left a fairly big imprint? Yeah. Not knocking our buildings down. Okay, we come to the last one. This is Selma Albert Conrad. So you remember before that Danker built Conrad's butcher shop. This is Conrad's son. And it's a great moustache. I think out of all of them, I like, he is the most beautiful, but it's a painting, not a photograph. So in paintings, you can look truly beautiful. He did Cunell's. Cunell's shop is in Rundle Street, and it's still there. It's been beautifully renovated, and just with such a light touch. It still brings out the true beauty of that Regency look. So, yeah, technically that facade is actually still behind there. I'm not sure in what condition. When they pulled the aluminium facades off the King William Street side of Beehive Corner, they were absolutely stunned to find that it had been the best thing that could have happened because it had actually protected the whole of the King William Street side from the traffic. And so it was pristine. I don't think that will be pristine if they ever pull it off. Oop, Waterfall Gully Kiosk. Another bit of whoops, too far. Bit of romance. Although he's brought in this little bit of Northern German work there. The Strathalbyn Savings Bank. Conrad did love a bit of the old Romanesque as well. This is a fairly impressive country bank. This was something that actually was brought out and won awards. And again, it stands out within the state. The Grosvenor Hotel down at Victor Harbour, another massive piece of architecture in the country. And all of them were doing this same sort of work. Institutes, war memorials, banks, churches, all the way through the country. You'll just find that it's these 5 people, all the stuff that was getting built and designed during that 1870s through to the 1910s was being designed by these guys. St Peter's and St Paul's Catholic Church up at Gawler. Conrad was from Hanover, but was Catholic. He was from one of the bits that had been previously a Catholic bishopric. So he's one of the Heuzenroeder, Conrad, Kaserhagen, Specht family who came out. One of the more confusing, a family that is more confusing than mine. But his piece de resistance is this: Adelaide's first strip mall. I love describing this. This was actually this is Adelaide's first purpose-built strip mall. He went absolutely full out, built it for his father, who was one of the richest butchers in the state. The idea being that each one of these came down to a shop, living quarters at the top, shop at the bottom, and there'd be bakers, grocers. And it was their design to actually work with the high residential area at the end. The problem was, of course, that they built it at the end of the Long Depression and everybody was actually moving out of that part of Hindley Street at the time, and so it promptly turned into a coffee house. So it's West's or Grant's Coffee House. This is noted by the Australian Institute of Architects as being one of the most outstanding pieces of Australian designed work, full stop. I'm not going into all of the architectural detail, it would take me too long. Now, the astute among you will have noticed that there's a certain similarity between a lot of these buildings. They're all brick with pale bits on them. That is only found in Adelaide. It is an Adelaide design trait. The red brick with banding on it in light colours is something that we do here. There's nowhere else. And we did that between 1890 and 1910. And we just went crazy with it. Like, seriously, we went crazy with it. Rundle Street. This is, what's his name? Can't think of his name. Sorry, Bürger's Observatory House. The old fruit and produce exchange in the East End, same sort of design colours. Tandanya, which was the powerhouse, built at the same time, same sort of design colours. And the weird thing is, it even comes up now in contemporary stuff, because as they build things now to actually be sympathetic to the other buildings around, we end up with car parks that are red brick with white banding in them in the city. So it's still having an impact today. Their choice to actually go out there and build these buildings in a particular way and really influence that out, that's keep on going today. Now, another few buildings, these weren't built by Germans, but they were built for Germans. In the next street, Tint Street, this is one of the few examples of Australian version of German cottages. My joke is always, you can always tell German cottages in Australia, they have very high-pitched roofs. It's to deal with our really, really serious snow problem. The Old German Club. The first two floors of the Old German Club, the top floor is actually the Salvation Army. That in the 1920s extended it with sympathetic extension on top to make it look exactly the same. And of course, was part of the syndicate that built Adelaide Arcade. So all of those things, they were built for Germans. So Germans, through their commissions, also influenced what's in Adelaide. Okay, that's the end of architecture. But wait, there's more. Okay, so these four blokes, some of you should know who these people are. If you don't, this is Richard Schomburg. This is Moritz Holzer, who took over from Schomburg at the Botanic Gardens director. This is August Wilhelm Pelzer, who looks somewhat stunned. I don't know what's in the corner over there, but he seems to be backing away. He was our first city gardener, and then this is Heinrich Ludwig Wotz. And again, all of these guys came out into Australia, lived in the city, and have had significant impact. So let's look at what Pelzer did. Pelzer was our gardener. From 1899 through to the 1930s, he turned all of the gardens that are parklands in Adelaide from dust bowls and rubbish tips into this. So when a lot of the trees that are built, Palmer Place, Highmarsh Square, this is Wellington Square, Creswell Gardens outside the footy ground, this is Kingston Gardens on East Terrace, and then all the plane trees. This is Pelzer. The reason that our streetscape, not the buildings, but the streetscape and the parks and gardens is because of Pelzer. Again, northerner, married one of my cousins. My family does nothing, but they marry well. I did marry well. I was going to say I didn't marry well. I married well. I'm only saying that because this is being live streamed and my wife possibly is watching. So, come on. You know you want to. In the Botanic Gardens, I don't think anybody will disagree that this is one of the most fantastic buildings. Well, you can disagree as you want. This is my second favourite building in the city, is the Palm House. Not merely for the fact that they sent it out as glass from Bremen and only broke a few of the plates of glass and then reconstructed it here. The only museum of economic botany that still exists in the world. This is the only major glass conservatory that still exists, because all the rest of them got bombed or got knocked down. You know, there are none of them left. This is it. These are really, really important buildings, not only within Australia or the city, but worldwide. And of course, the warning of what happens if you put a Moreton Bay fig in your yard and leave it to grow for 100 years. Don't, just in case you were thinking, but the Moreton Bay walk, that's the first thing that Schomburg did when he became director, was actually grow that, because he went, oh, these will look nice. They'll be fine. They'll be a bit shady. Yeah, that's a good idea. They were really important, the Botanic Gardens, because it's the Botanic Gardens, Holzer mostly, working with Pelzer, who determined that plane trees and ash trees were really, really good street trees to be used in the city. And they would, that they provide the appropriate shade, the appropriate lighting during the winter, and we've now found that the traffic fumes have absolutely no effect on them whatsoever, which is not something that they were designing them for. Voss. The Voss factory is renowned for some of the best stained glass work in Australia. Both church, this is all things in Adelaide churches. Very, very classical, but then also secular works. So these two are in the Brookman building that was built by Critchell, or designed by Critchell for School of Mines. These are the secular work that Voss's company actually put together. Voss himself wasn't involved in this. When he died, his sons had actually both predeceased him, and so the company didn't continue on, but his entire German staff got together and formed it as a cooperative company and took it over and kept running it. Does anybody know what the H.L. Voss company became in 1915? Clarkson's Glass, indeed they did. The only company I know of that actually changed their name due to the war, because at the time the managing director was Clarkson's. Do you know what the other part of H.L. Voss became? Dulux Australia, first company to produce commercial paint in Australia, in Port Adelaide. So you could say that every house that's been painted with Dulux is influenced by the fact of Germans. I know it's a long stretch, but I'm trying to draw a really long stretch here. You've got to grasp it and run with it and work up against the English, because we're only about 10% of the population. We punch above our weight. All right, let's look at the trades and professions, because we don't just want to look at the great men. We don't want to look at those people were great men. They were people that had lots of money. So let's look at trades and professions. There we go. So the trades and professions that are significant here in the city, if you were going to look at these people that had come out and were living in the city from about 1846 onwards, mostly from the north and the west of Germany, this is what they did. And I asked a bit of a question of this on Facebook, and Sam won. There you go, chocolate frog. Because we do proper chocolate frogs in Adelaide. None of these namby-pamby little things. We have proper chocolate frogs. Of course, it's a Haig's chocolate frog, because it's very important that we use Haig's chocolate frogs when we do German, because all Haig's chocolate is, of course, Stratmann chocolate. Haig was a confectioner, not a chocolatier, and he bought lock, stock and barrel, including staff and including the assistants and including all the recipe books he wasn't meant to get his hands on, from Carl Stratmann. If you ever read the history book of Haig's, and it says, Stratmann threw up his hands and went back to Melbourne to make jam. This is the thing about history. So I've got to tell you this. So he didn't. He was a very rich man. The CWA building on Decateville Terrace? Yeah, that's his house. He wasn't a poor man. He'd only been here for 3 years, and he was already built by buying houses that were very new and very large and quite expensive. 1915, I think he realised that the war wasn't going to necessarily make things easy, and so he sold up, and he sold it to Haig, and I'm sure that he actually sold it at a fairly bargain basement price. But during the war, he also managed to put his daughter through school, his son through St Peter's Boys, and then through engineering at University of Adelaide. His son was also Carl. Carl Jr. went back to Melbourne to make jam, like become the managing director of the largest conserve company in Australia. But there's little bits. But Stratmann's a bit weird. He after the war, he went, "All right, family, no, not living here anymore. We're going to Brazil. Going to move to Brazil." On the phone, they get on the boat, they get to Brazil, walk down the gangplank, look at Rio de Janeiro, and he went, "Nope." Walked back up the gangplank, got back on the ship, went to Germany, which wasn't a bad move. Germany at that time, you're talking fairly massive inflation. $1 US would be worth about it got up to 1.3 billion mark at one stage. So if you came with sterling, you were pretty much set for life. Unfortunately, he couldn't get back into Australia until 1925 when they allowed Germans to migrate back into Australia. So he had to stay over there. And in 1925, he came back to Australia. Very, very good friend of Hans Heysen. Spent the rest of his days sitting around with Hans Heysen making etchings. Lived very, very comfortably. How did I get onto that? Oh, the chocolate frog, that's right. Anyway, jewellers. Okay, we are renowned for our jewellers. Not a lot of them, but if you wanted the silversmithing, goldsmithing or jewellery done in Adelaide, then you went to Germans. Schomburg and Steiner went. We always said he was Danish, but again, Brunkhurst, Basse, who always, I think, put the little accent on the end to make himself look French, and Firnhaber. And again, these are all people from the north of Germany. They came out here, but they are absolutely seen as the best silver and goldsmiths of the colonial period. Firnhaber was sort of forgotten about. He was actually the first of the gold and silversmiths to come out here. And he's had a bit of a renaissance within the arts industry. Now they're understanding exactly the quality of work as his work starts to come back out of private hands and is starting to be seen publicly. Firnhaber's work is seen as some of the finest colonial smithing work. Firnhaber went for a while and worked for Brunkhorst for a while, and Schomburg worked for both of them as well. So Firnhaber and Schomburg, this is Schomburg Julius, who's Rickard's brother, and also Otto's brother, but Julius was the youngest, that their mastery of this fine thing. So this is it's in the art gallery, it's about that big, and just the absolute fine filigree of vine work and individual grapes coming around there. So they were masters at what they could do. Pretty much every major cup or plate for competition came out of those firms, Steiner in particular. A lot of chalices and monstrances within churches across Australia. So I think the Hobart Anglican monstrance is a Firnhaber. The Captain Bagot Cup came out from this group of people. Like, it's just everything. It's always, if you were going to give something as a gift, you would give from one of these. You know, if you wanted to be taken seriously, this is what you did. If you wanted to give a gift to royalty when they were coming over, this is what you gave them. You gave them things from these Germans. So cabinet makers. Now this is why Sam won. As I said, I'd asked the question. I said, we've just data mined the there we go. Put that down there. We've just data mined all of the people from European settlement through to 1872 who were naturalised, all the Germans who were naturalised, and we identified what all of their occupations were when they said they were naturalised, for those who said that they were living in Adelaide, which is a tricky subject, which I'll get to a bit later, but those that said that they'd been living in Adelaide. And the highest percentage of them was, does anybody want to have a punt? What do you think the highest one was? Come on. Sorry? No. No, they drank at pubs. They weren't very good. No, that's not true. Farmers. But it's a really dodgy term because people like Andreas Borchardt, who was a serious basket weaver, said he was a farmer. So I think there was a lot of these aspirational farmers who were saying, oh yes, I'm a farmer now, I'm landed gentry. I've come out here from my small holding in Hanover and I'm going to live here and be a farmer on my 80 acres of country land at Stepney. Everything outside of the city was country. So a lot of them said that. The next highest was cabinet makers by about 1%. And if you then add in all of the joiners and the carpenters, about a quarter of the people that were living in Adelaide when they got naturalised were carpenters, cabinet makers and joiners. It's just a massive, massive set. Some of them did quite well. Some of them were just workers. One of the ones that did quite well was Gottfried Kühnel, and then his son Wilhelm. They decided that they were going to start to import piano workings and then build the cabinets around them and flog them off. And pretty much, if you wanted to get a piano, you went to Kühnel's. It was the largest piano store in the Southern Hemisphere. They had 400 pianos and organs on the shop floor and 600 in the warehouse out the back. And they were moving them. And they were one of the first ones to do it on a radio rental style thing, rent to buy. You could actually do it on rent to buy. Of course, some people tried to do it on the rent to buy and then sell it. After they paid their first deposit, they'd get it, and then they'd try to flog it off to somebody rather else without telling them, and then, make a bit of money out of it. So he was in court quite a bit. But Kühnel's. Kühnel wasn't afraid to advertise a bit. So this is Scott's Church on North Terrace. This is the corner opposite it, and he painted the roof. Is it? Try Kühnel's piano showrooms in Pirie Street. I'm guessing that's a really steep roof. So German, obviously, again, to deal with the snow problem, because there weren't a lot of aeroplanes to be able to see it in this period of time. But the thing is, he actually built the majority of the buildings on this acre. He leased it out from the South Australian company, and he built them for his workers. So this was full of carpenters and joiners and metal workers, etc., that were actually working within his piano workshop. And so you had this entire area there that was just full of tradespeople. You'll see also here, this is obviously the dome on top of Adelaide Arcade, which says, Estes Organs, buy at Kühnel's. And then there's a hand at the top pointing across Rundle Street to where... I so want to put that back there. That's heritage stuff. That should be on the top of the dome now. They should put it back to, like that was a significant part of the culture. We should have it back like that. None of this, let's keep it all pristine. Let's put that back on there. Really weren't afraid to market themselves. Gottfried Kühnel, so the elder, ended up getting out of the business and called himself an agent. If you ever look up the Kühnel name in the certificates of title indexes, you'll find that his name goes over about 3 pages in every year range, because he was lending money to Germans left, right and centre as they came through. So he was handling mortgages. He'd made so much money from his cabinet making and then his piano sailing that his son was able to purpose build a new factory in Rundle Street, and he was able to basically retire and just lend money and live off the takings of that. Oh look, that's the sort of thing I want to do. But I sold my Kühnel. I actually had a Kühnel piano, but it was very out of tune. Some of the other ones who you may know of, Pengeli and Knaba. Knaba, of course, that's Knaba Junior. Knaba Senior was a cabinet maker who ended up then deciding to start upholstering things for chairs, and then decided to become a mattress maker, because it's what you do. But his son was also a cabinet maker and knew about upholstery. So when Pengeli decided to move from being a cabinet maker to being an undertaker, he felt that having somebody that could do the upholstery was a really, really good thing. Interesting, there was Frau Knaba at Udunda, who was a midwife. So you had the Knabas both at the beginning and at the end, which I think is, that's quite lovely. That company still technically exists as part of Blackwell Funerals. So it's one of the another really longest running ones. 1860s it was started up. Had to move out of Rundle Street because every time that they had a funeral procession, it blocked the whole of Rundle Street, and also people were starting to get upset by the bodies being carried backwards and forwards over the footpath. So they decided to move out. Eitzen, Julius Eitzen, another cabinet maker and undertaker, also in Rundle Street. Rundle Street, if you needed a German funeral, Rundle Street was the place to be. So Julius Eitzen was also there. I like the fact that he's quite open. A child's funeral, is, if you want just the mourning coach, is £3, 3 shillings. Adult's funeral, where you'll need a hearse and a mourning coach, is £5, 5 shillings. So actually out there and just said, this is it, it's a set rate. Don't worry don't have to haggle with me, this is a set rate. It's very open about what they do. Country orders promptly attended to, which is probably something that you'd be wanting. I don't know. I mean, if the country's against Stepney, that's fine, but I can't imagine you doing a borough trip in a quick one to try to get there. Muir and Son, I thought, was the most interesting one. So he was a cabinet maker and undertaker, very, very common in the English world as well. It's very common because you know how to make boxes as a cabinet maker, so, you know. Muir decided to take this a different way. He built billiard tables and bagatelle tables. So my brain automatically goes to coffins lined with green baize. I don't know whether that was one of his things. And maybe balls sort of running around in channels on the inside as you're carrying it. Anyway, funerals furnished on the shortest notice, particularly in summer. So again, in Rundle Street, they were all there, just nicely in Rundle Street, all living quite happily together, this lovely line of German undertakers, which is good. And the weird thing about Australia, or South Australia, is that, well, I mean, you probably don't think it's weird. Lots of you are Lutheran. I'm not Lutheran. I have German background, but both of my German families changed their names. And so we never spoke of it again. Don't talk about the war, don't talk about the Germans. So I grew up at lots of places. One of the places I grew up was Cambrai, and I became an archivist. So I think it's something about the water there, is that, because there were peaches at Cambrai as well, but I'm not sure if they're your peaches. Are they your peaches? Yeah, so you've got to live at Cambrai, and that's how you get jobs at the archives. So Shearer and the Peaches and the Hollisters have all been at Cambrai and have all ended up at the archives. I think that's the highest percentage of people. There's only 95 people that live at Cambrai, and the majority of us have ended up at the archives. Anyway, that aside, where was I going? Come on, take me back, quick. Sorry? Oh, the funerals, yeah. No, can't remember. Doesn't matter. So no, gone. We'll move on. The other one up there I said was tobacconists, and this is a weird thing, but by 1864, Adelaide only had one non-German specialist tobacconist in the city. All of the rest of them were Germans. Now, not a huge number of them, but, you know, enough. Gaeth, Meyer, Lübke, Armbruster and Ullemann, Bender, Kernke, and then the tobacco desk in Gurker and Rodemans. And you go, and the only person that wasn't a German was Mrs. Jury. If you go back 20 years before that, they're all English. If you go back 10 years before that, they're mostly English. But by the 1860s, it had absolutely turned across into a German trade. I've put a copy of a book here, Blaue Dunst und Rote Fahnen, Blue Smoke and Red Flags, which is it's a thesis on the Bremen tobacco trade. And that whole area, the Elbe-Weser sort of triangle between Hamburg and Bremen on the rivers, was the centre of the German tobacco trade, because it's near the two harbours, so you can get leaf in from other places. But then they started having all of the processing there. So there's a massive number of workers. And this book goes into all the interesting things of showing how many people from the various strata of society actually came in and ended up in that tobacco trade. And that then moved across. That these people were starting to come here. It's a bit like when MacArthur in Sydney was looking for vine dressers, and one of the people that actually got shipped out, he was the mayor of a largish town, and he sort of went, yeah, but everybody I know is a vine dresser, so I know what a vine is, so it can't be that hard. And this, everybody in the area of there, they knew something about the tobacco trade. So Adolf Bartel, who was the first German mayor of Adelaide, father-in-law of Hans Heusen, started out in the tobacco trade. He came out as part of the tobacco trade. He first worked at Gerken Rodeman, then started his own shop, and then sold the shop to Armbruster and Ullmann. Did I mention it's a bit incestuous within the German community? We do tend to buy and sell things to each other quite a lot because you all speak German, so it becomes much easier to deal with people that you know. Pubs. Now I've got to make an admit. You know how I said I got Zvekt? So one of the first things that they said, well, let's be honest, it was Lois. Lois sent Dean to ask me, and you know I like Dean, so and she knew that, and so she knew I wouldn't say no to Dean because you know Dean's nice. And I'm not saying that Lois isn't. Anyway, I said to Lois, "What do you want me to talk about?" And she goes, "Oh, anything you want." And that's really hard because it's like, oh, there's lots of things I can talk about. And I like making alliterative titles or funny titles. For example, I'm doing one for SAGS, and the title is something. They took the last train for the coast, German Railways and Migration. None of you are Don Vincent fans, I can tell. Anyway, so I did this. I was trying to think of something, and I got a few words that started with A, but the last one I was told wasn't appropriate. So I got P's, and that's why I got pubs, pastors, and politicians. So I'm going to talk about pubs. Just because I feel that if I don't talk about at least one of those topics, you'll all feel let down. And somebody came in and said, "Is this the pubs talk?" There's a bit of pubs. There's been pictures of pubs. Anyway, this is a snapshot of every pub in the City of Adelaide, south and north, that at some stage was licensed by a German. As pretty much, I think it's 50% of them were, and it's not all at once, obviously, but they're all there. There was significant work into it. However, there are none of the 7 breweries in the city were ever run by Germans. Anybody want to take a punt on why not? This is not a non-interactive class, okay? Why didn't Germans do brewing? What sort of beer do Germans drink? No. Styles rather than brands. Lagers. Pilsner is a lager. They drink lagers. Lagers require constant cool temperature in order to brew appropriately. You may not have noticed, but the summers in Adelaide don't necessarily have constant cool temperatures. So they went this, and so they just made wine instead. It's much easier, and Lois prefers it. So you were getting Zvekt even before the Zveks were around. So they ran the pubs, selling English ale to the English people, but didn't necessarily drink it a lot. In fact, by the time that we'd actually got electric cool rooms in and our one German brewer in the metropolitan area started to try to make lagers, the German population in the city had actually completely turned over to ales, and when the lagers came out, they went, "Oh no, that's disgusting," and just kept on going with the ales. See, because you can't do anything wrong with ales. Yeah, they've already got floaty stuff in them. You can't badly brew an ale. It doesn't really matter. It's English and it's warm. You serve them the room temperature. Anyway, so the Germans were really involved in a lot of the running of it. Bartel, who had been a tobacconist and ended up being the mayor of Adelaide in between time, was a publican, mostly because the previous publican had died and Bartels quickly sold his shop and went over and married her and took over the pub. I think it was like one of those dreams. It's like a midlife crisis thing. I just want to own a pub. And they didn't have sports cars, so it was getting a pub instead. So it was a lot of them were running these pubs. Some of them, however, it became a real family affair. They'd obviously come from places where running hotels and guest houses, etc., was a significant part of their background. So you've got, next, people like the Yarn family. Next. Is it going to start? There we go. So the Yarn family, that's the Gumaraka Hotel, that's the Wellington Hotel in Curry Street, that's the Tivoli Hotel in Piri Street, that's the Haimarsh Hotel in Piri Street, That's the Park Hotel, which is now the Griffin's Head. That's the, I don't know what pub that is. Oh, that's the Kentish Arms. That's the Kent Town. That's the Federal Hotel and Semaphore. That's the Bijou in Rundle Street. That's the East End Market Hotel. That is the Richmond Hotel. That is the Maid and Magpie. This is one family in a period of 30 years, ran all of these pubs. So they also ran that's the Sportsman at Mount Gambier. That's the Austral in Rundle Street. And that is the White Horse in Curry Street. So that's the Yarn family. It's over a couple of generations, but they actually became a publican family. They ended up at, and I forgot, they ran the Exeter as well in Rundle Street. So that's 17 pubs in the space of 30 years. They were running some of them concurrently, some of them after each other, some of them were sons going out there. Some of them were I think once the original Yarn had died, his wife kept running it. German females running pubs was quite acceptable. And some of them ran them for significant amounts of years. So you have that. You then also have publicans like Jakob Ferdinand Schmidt, who started off at the Queen's Arms down on Commode Street. He's the one that built those workers' cottages over on Tin Street. He also had the Oxford built. He's more known for when he was at the Golden Fleece in Curry Street for 18 months. I think he was in court 7 or 8 times for allowing ladies of the night to operate in his premises, about the same amount of time for failing to close his business on times, and most incredibly, he sued his cook for assaulting him. So this is how that ran. He went in and argued with his cook. Okay, rule number 1, don't do that. Right, not the person that's going to make your food. So he said, had the argument, got angry, threw a pan of boiling water at her. Unfortunately, she was doing the ironing at the time, picked up a hot iron off the stove and glonked him in the head. And so he took her to court for assault, and the judge just looked at them and went, nope, she wins. So he promptly went bankrupt again and moved on. So some of them were good, some of them were bad. Then there were the long-term families, and these are probably 2 of them. The Dreyer family at the Prince Albert in Wright Street moved in 1852. The last time I saw a licensee under the Dreyer name was in 1933. And the Burm family up at the Dover Castle in Archer Street. When Burm came back, Burm was one of the few that went to the goldfields and actually came back with money. He bought or had the Dover Castle built, and while they only ran it as the licensees for about 30 years, they owned it up until the 1940s. So yeah, there's sort of these migratory publicans, but there's also long-term family publicans, and some really interesting stories that come out of there. And once I start doing tours again, you have to come along and see them, because we're going to run out of time. Okay. I can't remember what this one's going to be about. What's the next slide? Oh, no, I know what this one is. Okay, I remember. So this is where all of the churches and schools and clubs and etc. that we've identified to date during data mining have been in the City of Adelaide from 1838 through to 1920. And so all of these yellow dots, which you can't really see very well, are where German language services were held. So it had the mission to the Ghana. This is Stow's Congregational Church, where the first Lutheran service in South Australia was held, before Kavel turned up. Teichelmann was the first Lutheran pastor to give a service. And then over here, of course, you've got St Stephen's today, Bethlehem today. This is St Stephen's the first. This is where the Bethlehem congregation was before they built their church. This is where Maschmidt's congregation was before they had the split. This is where they got kicked out to, over here, the Zion Church, which was a Baptist church. This is the Grenfell Street Scotch Church, where Kepler first started. But the really interesting one is actually here, and it's called Playford's Chapel. And it's called Playford's Chapel because Playford he denomination jumped. He made his way through the various versions of the Methodist Church. So he was New Connection, and then he was Primitive Methodist, and then he was Methodist, and then he was Wesleyan, and then he was Bible Christian, and then he went back to New Connection again, depending on who was annoyed with him at that point of time. But he had a chapel built, and in the morning at about 8 o'clock, well, what happened is that Teichelmann, once Teichelmann had stopped being a missionary, and he decided to try to finally get a congregation happening there. Now, Teichelmann was part of Fritzsch's synod, Old Lutheran. So he called together this group and got people in there, and yep, that's great. Let's build a church, and we'll have ministry here, and we'll have services here at Playford's Chapel because Playford needed to get a bit of money in. That's great. Everything will be fine. But Teichelmann didn't realise that. Well, he soon found out. After about the second meeting, he realised that half the people that were meeting with him were all actual Union Church people and wanted Union Church services, not Old Lutheran Church services, which is why they'd never joined the Old Lutheran Church. Now, it's the reason the Old Lutherans came here in the first place, is they weren't terribly fond of the Lutheran of the Union liturgy. So, one wonders how this is going to work. So, in the morning at 8 o'clock, they had the Union Church, and then they had the Methodist services, and then in the afternoon, they had the Old Lutheran services. It sort of kept the two German congregations away from each other for about 2 hours, so you didn't get the crossover at the door or anything. But that Union Church actually did quite well. They had a grammar school. It's one of the earliest full day schools that was running in the city. This is 1846. By 1849, that Old Lutheran group had actually built over here the first built church on Angus Street, where the WEA is now, Dreifaltigkeitskirche, the Trinity Church, and that continued to have its issues, which is a whole other topic. You need to get one of the old copies of the FoLA journal, which talks about Lutherans in the City of Adelaide, and then just try and follow it. It's sometimes difficult. They jump around a bit. I have actually missed out on a couple of people here. There's also should be a mark here, which is where the Roman Catholics were. We had a fairly large German congregation from between 1846 and 1849. We had so many German Catholics that they actually imported out a German-speaking priest, Bachhaus. He lasted 3 years, couldn't stand the weather, the heat mostly and the dust, went to the goldfields, conducted it was a bit cooler over there apparently. He conducted the first Catholic Mass on the goldfields, was a German Mass. I think by the 1860s there's about 10,000 Germans on the goldfields. Most of them are from Adelaide. When a lot of the Hanoverians all started to turn up, they'd all been told, oh, come to Adelaide, lots of business opportunities, lots of Germans. They turned up and went, where are all these Germans? They went, oh, they went to Victoria. So some of the smart Germans did the whole thing of like, oh, you're going to Victoria, do you need to sell your property? Oh, you can have it for this. And then when they returned, they went, oh, you want to buy a property? Here you go. That's how Cunell made his money. And the other one, of course, is actually over here just off Rundle Street, which is the synagogue. Now, the majority of the Jewish people that were in here were actually English Jews, which gets into this whole thing of like, what is a German? Because their names were things like Meyer and Goldstein, and you're going, well, these are German names. So obviously they came from German Jewish communities into England. But then there was also Germans. So Jewish people that had come directly from German-speaking lands that were actually meeting in the synagogue. The Ashkenazi Jews had been going into England for hundreds of years. Had Hanoverians, they'd all been going into England for hundreds of years. So you end up with this really odd thing of trying to work out who is a German and who is not a German. Jacob Hagen, or Jacob Hagen, as he's known in English, but Jacob Hagen, who was one of our members of parliament, was a fourth generation English person, but he was German in background, and he'd been part of the German community within England and supported the German community here, but he was English. And then you've got people like Francis Stacker Dutton. He was born in Germany, he was educated in Germany, he spoke German fluently because he learnt it as his second native tongue. He highly supported the German people, but he's English. But he was born in Germany. But he was English, but he was born in Germany. So there's a lot of exchange. As soon as, particularly once George came into effect in England as the King of Britain, you suddenly had this odd thing of, well, does that effectively make Great Britain part of Hanover now? You know, in the same way that Wentaway said, no, the Danes ruled Holstein, therefore I am Danish. I'm going, well, that would make everybody in Britain Hanoverian, and I don't see that coming at that. So it's really weird trying to work out who's who and what's what. So we have this. The green dots are where there are various clubs, and the yellow dots are where we've identified schools and private tutors running at the time. That's not about the pastors, but it gives you an idea there of like this quite diverse community, social organisation happening in there. Oop, I've got to move along. Anyway, when I first started this, my whole idea was I was going to try and prove, I like maps. I was absolutely sure that what I was going to find is this massive amount of data points sitting in this square between Grenfell Street, what is now Gawler Place, Angus Street, and what is now Frome Road. And I thought that this is where everything's going to be. If you note that, and if you know where all the churches, etc., are, they're all in there. All the ones that exist today are in that area. Both of the German clubs are in that area. So to me, that made sense. This is where people would be. But what I found was, so this is 1878 in Germany. No, not particularly. There were Germans everywhere in the city. All of those blue dots are where Germans were living. The purple dots are where they were living and running businesses. The red dots, which you can't really tell the difference between a red dot and a pub. But the red dots are basically businesses that they're running. And what you do tend to find is that Germans get attracted to high streets. So the high street in the city is the Rundle Street, Hindley Street area. North Adelaide has 3 high streets. You've got Commode Street. Before there was the O'Connell Street connection there, Commode Street was a high street, Melbourne Street was a high street, and Tint Street was actually the high street. And if you go and look at Tint Street now, you go, oh, is that why the primary school, the fire station, the post office, the churches and all the pubs are on Tint Street, and why Tint Street's really, really wide and ends up going into Wellington Square where all the rich people can then promenade before they go over the park to their homes in the lovely top of the hill area. That's the main road through that part. And you get out by going out along to the end and then coming up onto the North Road. Putting O'Connell Street through completely destroyed actually Light's plan of it. So you get the same thing. On Commode Street is where the police station was, it's where the post office was, it's where all the churches were. Melbourne Street's the only high street which is actually still there. And what I found is that there's actually these little clusters. So there's this cluster of Germans over here in Chichester Gardens, the first residential subdivision, like specifically subdivided to sell as residential blocks. And lots of Germans moved out there, von Einems, Andreas Borchardt, Riegers, lots of other people. Can't remember all their names. There's these clusters along Wakefield Street. At one stage, probably about 75% of Wakefield Street was either owned by or lived in by Germans. But then also along Flinders Street, you end up with a lot of residents. And then there's a bit of a cluster along Grenfell Street, and coming around the east, where there were large lodging houses, and so a lot of Germans were actually living in those, and they were owned by Germans, and then they rented them out to Germans. And I've got a feeling, oh no. So this is 1865 in Rundle Street. Come on, can you just click the thing through? These are all the types of things that were happening in 1865 in Rundle Street. So you're looking about 20 years into the Germans coming into the city. Stop. Maybe one more. Yeah, there we go. That's the last one. And you can see it's a fairly generic, general sort of thing. There's nothing particularly interesting. Hairdressers. Hairdressers were fairly big amongst Germans as well. They also sold tobacco. But you see the cabinet makers, you see the jewellers, you see the tobacconists, you see the publicans all running in there. Flick to the next one. And this is the map. So this is, all of those red ones are where the Germans were along that part between Pulteney Street. This is just Pulteney Street to King William Street. It's not taking in the east end of Rundle Street. It's just that, what is now Rundle Mall. Come to the next one, which is about 13 years later, and quickly flick through them. And suddenly you see there's a lot more tobacconists. And we start to see things like fancy warehouses and fancy bazaars. Very, very different. You have to understand that a fancy warehouse is completely different to a fancy bazaar. Keep going. Photographers are coming in there. You've got music repositories, house decorators, picture framers, piano sellers, ladies outfitters. So there's this whole range of starting to get far more urbane in what they're actually doing. That's all right, you can flick to the next bit. And you still see that there's quite this density of Germans actually running in through that Rundle Street. Next. What's this? Oh, okay. So I've mentioned data mining a couple of times, and this is actually how I have tried to get the information out. It's by data mining, and this is something Sam asked me about, is how do you work out who actually lives in the city? And I'm going, it's really hard. And it's really hard because it means going through all these really badly handwritten stuff. So these are the assessment books from the City of Adelaide, and I've gone through from 1846 to 1920 and highlighted all the names that look German. Okay, is Frost a German name? Yeah, it's also an English name. Is Jepp, G-E-P-P, a German name? It's both a German name and an English name, and they both ran pubs. Really, really helpful. Oh, it's Publican Jepp. It's your German, it's Publican Gepp. Rose, Haverland. That's a good one. That's a good German name. Haverland, H-E-A-V-E-R-L-A-N-D. Yeah, they're Germans. German tailor. There's all of these names that come up. And then, of course, you've got the problem of all of these Germans that have been living in England for 300 years that have come out as English and use their names. And nobody puts their full name down. They just put initials. So I have this thing. If it says F-W-C-H Rose, I go, probably German. Only because English people don't tend to give their people full names. All right, it's a very German thing to give them full, but that's about the extent of it. But if you're down there as Frederick William Haverland, you could be German, you could be, you know. You've got Holden and Frost. The Frost in Holden and Frost is a German Frost. If it wasn't for Frost bringing the money into the Holden company, we wouldn't have had Holden motor cars. Interestingly, the first Commodore is an Opel, which is a German car. Again, there's just these cycling through things. I don't know whether he was involved in that. So we have that. Flick onto the next one. This is the City of Adelaide electoral roll, so going through that and trying to get it, and then trying to work out, because they also had this really bad habit of just saying, oh, they live on Wright Street. Where on Wright Street do these people live? I want to map them, and it's trying to find where they're actually specifically sitting. Just keep flicking through. I'm just going to keep pointing out ones. So these are the almanacs and directories, post office directories, going through those and getting them all out. This is the list from 1872 of every person that had been naturalised in South Australia, and going through there and actually trying to pull out the Germans who had said that they were in Adelaide, and then finding that, I don't know who wrote this list, but it doesn't actually match up with the applications for naturalisation in the National Archives. There's names on here that aren't there, and then there's names in the National Archives that aren't on this. So it's a very, very bad record keeping, obviously not done by Germans. Next. These are admissions to the destitute asylum. There were a number of Germans, and the great thing is that they actually say, oh, this person came from Germany. So you've got Schlater, that's spelled really badly, who's from England? Was that me or you? Schmidt's from Germany and Schultz is from Australia. So it gives you, the really good thing is though, it does actually give you the ship that they came out on and where they're from in Germany. Of course, quite often that's just that. If they say they came from England, it could have been that they took a short ship across to England and then came from England. You don't know, it's quite tricky. Next. And of course, Lutheran Archives, because how could I not do something at Lutheran Archives when I'm meant to be working? And this is part of Pastor Kavel's baptism book, Taufregister. He had that from the 1840s onwards, and these are really great because he says who the father was, where the father currently lives, what the father's current occupation is, and trying to do that. Now, I have had some people feed back to me and say, oh, you haven't included this name and you haven't included that name. I've got about 35,000 biographies to write. If anybody has had family that lives in Adelaide and they want to write a 500-word biography on an individual, I would love you to do that because that way I can add it in there. With your name, I do not take credit for anything that somebody else writes. But I also need facts. And people say, oh, just go and read the family histories. And I'm going, yeah, but lots of the family histories from the 1980s don't actually include any sources. And therefore, being a really, really untrusting person, I don't believe them. And Jeffrey told me, Jeffrey said that if he could rewrite the books that he'd written in the 1960s, he'd do them better. So if Jeffrey couldn't get it right, then that means, I'm actually walking down the back for a purpose. I'm not just doing it aimlessly. I'm going to try and do something really technically tricky, which is show you my website, and then you can all go and get a cup of tea. And I just need to... I was in here at 6 o'clock this morning, seeing if this would work, and it should. Maybe. Go on, get on there. Yay! All right, so this is the Heimat Adelaide page. And to give you an idea, I'm just going to get this mouse over here. To give you an idea, there's lots of sort of different bits on this. I just need to find my mouse. Here we go. There's lists of biographies. So these are all people that we've started biographies on. Male and female and children. I don't care how old they are. I really want to try to capture all of the people that had German names that were there. Of course, that's also problematic because, you know, was George Clevitz-Sauer really German? I mean, his mother came from Hesse, one of the Hesses, not one of his mothers. But, you know, was he really German? I don't know how he was brought up. He was brought up Methodist, so he wasn't within a German church. We also have in here things of themed contact, so you can go into things like occupations and then look at education ones and teachers and get lists of, you know, people that are with that word teachers. So, you know, the Malpases. We know very, very little about the two Clevitz sisters. So this is sort of what the page looks like. It's really just you know, trying to go through and find what your family looks like. This is a sort of a fairly complete one. Johann Bollmann. Johann Bollmann lived down in Commode Street, so it goes through and talks about, you know, his background in Germany, coming to Australia, and then the family that he had, how they married out. You've got links through to all of his children, where the various residences were, so you can actually try and find the exact locations of where they were, where he worked in the city, and then any published biography, obituaries, etc. And if they've got photos and things that are available. I'm trying to collect that so it becomes quite a central repository. Not hugely detailed, that's for the family to do, but it gives a starting point and it allows you to look out. So this is the thing, you know, this is one cousin married August Wilhelm Pelzer, another one married Haken Linder, another one married Wilhelm Kindermann, another one married Friedrich Wilhelm Paek, the MP. This is my cousins marrying into good families, but not being particularly good. So this is a sort of thing that we're actually looking for on this page. Now the other thing is the map, and it's broken. No. Unfortunately, my virtual private server died and I can't show you the map. It's really annoying. In the next week or so, on the front page, there should actually be the interactive map here, which has completely died at the moment. And each one of those spots that came up in those maps, you can click on it and it'll actually tell you who lived there, what the sources are for where they were from, and then it gives you a link through to their biography for those that have got biographies, which isn't very many. So if anybody has got any family in Adelaide and wants to be involved in this, I'd love to hear from you. Anybody at all, please. On my tours, I'm very, very well known for one very, very special thing. That is abrupt endings. Thank you. And I'm happy for questions.
Okay, anybody got any questions? Because I'll have to bring the microphone to you. No?
No questions.
No questions.
Good class. Good class. Well done.
Well, what did you think? Amazing, wasn't it? You know, right from the start when Bethany introduced Ben with all the things he's involved with and known about, you know, I've been involved with history all my adult life and I could write my credentials on the back of a postage stamp compared to yours.
I don't stick to things.
So, amazing resume, but also an amazing amount of work, particularly on this topic, and as a History Month topic with more general interest. I'm hoping that so many of you who came along here from the History Month advert found it enjoyable as well. And we really need to commend you, Ben, on all the work that you're doing on this topic, as well as your tours, as well as your work at the Lutheran Archives. So you must work 24 hours a day, I think. But, you know, we commend you for it. We wish you well for what you still want to do. And maybe people here and elsewhere can help Ben getting information together for what you're wanting to achieve as a database. And we all live and learn, and I suppose you've still got the opportunity to learn more as well. But it's amazing how much influence, you could say, people of German background had on the business life in Adelaide, City of Adelaide. And so we thank you most sincerely for that. And you're most welcome to speak to Ben afterwards during supper. And in the meantime, probably he may not share this with you, but we've got a couple of bottles of wine here for you. So here's a little small appreciation.
Thank you.
Have you got that? For all your work. And so we hope you all enjoyed it. You're welcome to come to any of our meetings if you want to. And usually in recent years we've tried to find a topic of more secular interest for History Month, which has been very successful for us in recent years, and tonight's is no exception. And I'm hoping that you all enjoyed it, both FoLA members and visitors, and got something out of what Ben has presented as a really inspirational presentation here tonight. Thank you. So, just to remind our members and anybody else who would like to, our next meeting will be, is it 27th of June, here. And it's on a Hermannsburg topic, you might say, but Dr. David Moore is a very experienced linguist and researcher, translator in Central Australia. He is married to a local lady from South Australia, and he has a holiday house at Dutton North. You know where Dutton is, you sort of blink and you've missed it, and they've got a holiday house there. But he himself comes from Western Australia, and so we're very privileged to have him here again next month, and we hope that you might enjoy what he's got to say about certain aspects of Pastor Shearer's life as a missionary in Central Australia. So look, that concludes the meeting tonight. You're most welcome to join us for supper across the road in the church hall. Now, has that other group gone yet? There was another group over there having a tea tonight. So look, you're welcome to come over there to join us for supper. And Helen, did you bring those books? You might recall that we had some books printed on the German Hermannsburg land rights issues. It's been very popular and we've had to reprint it. And so this is the reprint now, is $15. And if you want to get a copy, see Helen tonight. It's a book that's being of interest widely throughout Australia, throughout a wide genre of businesses and government departments and people of interest to that project, which took a long time, and it's quite unique, and it's a trailblazer for Aboriginal titles. So you're most welcome to see that. Okay, so you're most welcome to adjourn over to the church hall, and if you've got any questions for Ben, he'll be around the place. Just look for the red shirt.